The tragedy of the stateless in Kuwait, 60 years of oppression and deprivation. When I talk or write about the suffering and the injustice endured by the stateless people in Kuwait, people ask me, who are the stateless, or what do you mean by stateless? The stateless are longtime inhabitants of Kuwait who have been deprived from citizenship, identity, health, education, and work. Due to the extreme racism practiced against the stateless by the Kuwaiti government, they do not carry any official documentation or any form of identification. No birth certificate, no driver license, no passport, no marriage certificate, not even a death certificate. They live and die without a trace, as if never existed. It goes without saying that the stateless have no political rights in Kuwait. The growing problem of the stateless began as Kuwait gradually transformed into a modern state in the late 40s and early 50s. Until the 40s, when oil excavated by the British brought wealth to the little state, Kuwait consisted of a small community living by the Arabian Gulf, fishing and diving for pearls, and another community of Bedouins, nomad tribes living in the desert, herding cattle, and continuously traveling to where water and grass can be found. As oil money allowed Kuwait to grow and become a recognized civil state, the Kuwaiti government called its people to apply for official citizenship and passports in an effort to nationalize its people. As the new-founded wealth attracted foreign labor to the state, the Kuwaiti government wanted to draw a clear line between who was entitled to benefits and who was not. This procedure required individuals coming forward to bring proof, birth certificates of fathers and forefathers who have been Kuwaiti inhabitants since the 20s. Because there are many nomad tribes, Bedouins, who were, in most cases, illiterate, many of these tribe members were left out, falling through the cracks of bureaucracy. Numerous Bedouin tribes were not recognized as citizens of Kuwait, and therefore were also deprived of passports and other identification, tying them to the land. Until the 80s, this did not constitute a huge problem for some of these stateless tribes, who were, back then, allowed to enroll their children in free government schools and their sons in the army without proof of citizenship. However, when the Iraqi invasion upon Kuwait ended in 1991, the Kuwaiti government claimed that many Iraqis came through the borders and settled in the outskirts of the city and demanded to be recognized as Kuwaiti citizens, alienating all the stateless people as non-Kuwaiti drifters who are only after the benefits a Kuwaiti citizenship offers. The Kuwaiti government to this day insists that all the stateless are either Iraqis, Saudis, Jordanians, or Syrians who claim they are stateless, but are in reality hiding their country's passports in hopes that they will be issued the Kuwaiti citizenship. The only way to remove them from Kuwait, the Kuwaiti government claims, is to make their lives so unbearable by denying them health, education, and work. In this way, the stateless will eventually bring out their real passports and leave to their homelands. When the stateless go to the Committee of Illegal Residents, founded in 2010 as a step to find a solution for the stateless, showing proof of their fathers' and grandfathers' birth certificates, born in Kuwait in the 40s and inhabiting Kuwait since then, and showing that many of them served not only in the Kuwaiti army, but were also the Sheikh's personal guards, and fought the Iraqis in 1990. The committee turns them away, claiming that these documents are forged. The stateless cannot seek the courts to demand their rights, as the Kuwaiti citizenship law keeps all legal matters relating to citizenship outside the scope of the Kuwaiti court's jurisdiction, calling anything relating to citizenship matters of sovereignty, determined only by the Kuwaiti sheikh. The sheikh is the Arabic word for ruler. In most Western news outlets, the term Prince of Kuwait is used to describe the ruler, who never really portrayed the image of a prince, always an old haggard man suffering from poor health and ominous in appearance. Kuwait is ruled by an authoritarian family called Al-Sabah, who imprison anyone who criticizes them. Mubarak al-Sabah, a fascist who ruled Kuwait from 1896 until 1915, made it a rule that the sheikhdom of the state can only be passed down to his male descendants. One fascist Kuwaiti sheikh after another, they all promised to find a solution for the growing tragedy of the stateless, but to no avail. One corrupt Kuwaiti government after the other. One weak, powerless Kuwaiti parliament after the next. Promises made but never acted upon. And because the stateless never had any political power, they were never of any interest to the parliament. The Kuwaiti parliament, full of governmentalists, is another source of shame for Kuwait. Brought into existence in 1960 by then Kuwaiti Sheikh Abdullah al-Salim al-Sabah, via what seemed at the time as a progressive constitution, to prove that Kuwait, barely out of the economic clutches and political control of the British, is moving towards some form of democracy, rather than the one-man show of the oppressive Al-Sabah ruler. However, the poorly drafted Kuwaiti constitution only gives a pretense of rights and freedoms for the people. It was, in reality, only founded to cement Al-Sabah's authority, stating in its articles that Kuwait will always be under the rule of Al-Sabah, that the sheikh has full and complete sovereignty over the state, and gives the sheikh the power to dissolve the ramshackle parliament whenever the ruler wishes to do so, a power often practiced by Kuwaiti sheikhs. Sheikh Sabah al-Sabah, who died recently in September 2020, was a barbaric autocrat, jailing 5,000 Kuwaiti people during his reign for jokes about him posted on Twitter, or criticism, or call for political reform, with one man receiving 90 years in prison for a critical comment made about Sabah on Twitter. Sabah al-Sabah called himself the Prince of Humanity, and forced the media to dub him by this self-founded nickname each time he was mentioned in the news, which was all day, every day. Under the reign of Prince of Humanity, I too faced trial for calling him corrupt and holding him responsible for the tragedy and the inhumane treatment of the stateless, of which many have begun to commit suicide by lighting themselves on fire in the street in protest of the extreme hardship and crippling racism they face in Kuwait. The charges brought against me were defamation and spreading rumors with the intention of undermining state security, both felonies. The current Sheikh, Nawaf al-Sabah, is just as cruel and just as inhumane as his predecessor. Because Kuwaiti citizenship by law can only be passed on from the father to his offspring, the children of Kuwaiti women who are married to non-Kuwaiti men or stateless men are not entitled to a Kuwaiti citizenship and are treated as stateless. One would no doubt wonder, if a Kuwaiti woman was married to a non-Kuwaiti man from a different nationality, say an Egyptian man for example, wouldn't the child hold the father's nationality and be Egyptian? Yes, the child would hold their father's nationality. But for a Kuwaiti woman who divorces her foreign husband and lives in Kuwait with her children, the only country these children have ever known, they are in Kuwait treated as stateless, deprived of all rights afforded to a Kuwaiti child. Her children are considered and treated as stateless. A Kuwaiti woman cannot pass on her citizenship to her children. Her stateless children cannot even inherit her property after she dies. This situation, where the children of a Kuwaiti woman cannot even find work in Kuwait, highlights the misogyny of that patriarchal Muslim country. I cannot, in this essay, cover all the racism and alienation by which people carrying other nationalities are treated in Kuwait. That's a lengthy subject that must be kept for another essay. A woman named Shema, in her late 30s, of a stateless father who died fighting the Iraqis in 1990, and a Kuwaiti mother, tells me, I graduated from high school, which I was allowed to attend because my mother holds the Kuwaiti citizenship, but I was denied a certificate of graduation. I hoped I could go to college, but couldn't without a high school diploma. Many years later, officials announced they are offering children of Kuwaiti women from stateless fathers the right to attend college. But I had completed high school so many years ago, and without proof of completion, the only way for me to enroll was to re-attend high school. I did, but was still not accepted in the free public college. A Kuwaiti man proposed to me, and my family accepted him. But when we went to get permission to marry at the Committee of Illegal Residents, where stateless people like me have to go to get permission to marry, they told my fiancé he couldn't marry me as I had no identification. They refused to acknowledge our union. They said to my fiancé, "Why don't you marry a Kuwaiti woman? Why do you want to marry her?" pointing at me with obvious disdain. We traveled to a nearby Gulf country by car and got married there. But when we returned to Kuwait to certify the marriage contract, the committee would not certify it. Relationships between men and women outside wedlock are illegal in Kuwait, and the committee threatened to arrest us for adultery, which is punishable with imprisonment. I've always wanted to be a mother, to have a family, but I couldn't bear to bring a child in this hostile environment. According to the law, a Kuwaiti man can apply for the citizenship of his non-Kuwaiti wife. This is easily done when a Kuwaiti man marries a non-Kuwaiti woman. However, because the committee refuses to recognize my marriage to my husband, I suspect I will never get citizenship, says Shema. A man in his late 20s named Muhammad tells me the following. My Kuwaiti grandfather was a political activist in Kuwait in the 60s. As a punishment, the Kuwaiti government stripped him and all his descendants from citizenship. My father became stateless even though he wasn't born so. All his children are stateless too. Fate had my mother, who holds the Jordanian nationality and was pregnant with me at the time, to seek medical treatment in the United States due to health issues. As a result, I was born in the United States. My mother returned to Kuwait with me and I was raised there. But as I grew up, I saw that there was no life for me in Kuwait. I couldn't go to school, I could never work or belong there, so I left for the United States. I study and work in Cleveland, Ohio. I've lived in Cleveland for the past 9 years. It's hard to talk to my siblings in Kuwait. They tell me how oppressed they are, how incredibly hard life is for them in Kuwait. 2 sisters and a brother. Neither can work or study. It's a dead end for them wherever they turn. It's especially hard since our mother passed. I want to apply for them to migrate to the United States, but the procedure is arduous and expensive. They also don't want to leave our father alone, and he doesn't want to migrate to the United States. Sometimes when I speak to my siblings, I feel guilty, because I was the only one who managed to get away from the hell they are living in Kuwait, Muhammad says. The children of Kuwaiti mothers and stateless fathers are in some cases issued a gray passport, different from the blue Kuwaiti passport. These gray passports ensure they can never obtain a visa to any country they wish to migrate to, as the country of their destination immediately recognizes the gray passport as belonging to a stateless person who will surely come to that host country to remain and not just visit, and is therefore refused a visit visa. In addition to this, they are refused a visit visa because they cannot prove they have sufficient funds to visit the host country by submitting bank statements showing regular income. The stateless in Kuwait live well under the poverty line, denied work opportunities in both the government and the private sector. When they are offered menial, low-paying work by private employers, the general ostracization practiced by the Kuwaiti government and the Kuwaiti society against them as a whole emboldens employers to take advantage of the stateless workers, often paying them volatile wages or paying them less than other laborers carrying out the same work, or in many cases denying them pay altogether. Without formal work contracts to protect their labor rights, as the stateless are usually so desperate for any kind of work, they are willing to accept work without a contract to protect them. This allows employers to end their services without prior notice, without end-of-service benefits, and without remuneration of unpaid wages, knowing fully well that a stateless worker cannot turn to the courts to defend their labor rights or get compensation. The stateless children are not accepted in free government Kuwaiti schools. The only way for the stateless to educate their children is to enroll them in poorly built, poorly equipped private schools, founded only to accommodate stateless children. This is how deep their isolation from the rest of the Kuwaiti society runs. A stateless child never comes into contact with a Kuwaiti child who is a citizen. These schools are not free and are not affordable. And because of this, and because stateless parents often can't afford to enroll their children in these schools, many stateless children remain illiterate. I want to remind the reader, or the listener here, that Kuwait is a Muslim country, and its people are Muslim people. The religion that claims to surpass all other religions in its humanity, and its followers are the same people who claim they are the most merciful, peace-loving, and most generous in almsgiving. Although statistics differ, some Kuwaiti sources say the number of the stateless in Kuwait is 25,000 people. Some say it's risen to 50,000, and some claim it's risen to 100,000 people. Kuwait is not a country known for its accuracy or its transparency. A little oil monarchy with a brutal sheikh who keeps his people pressed hard under his boot. All news in Kuwait is government propaganda. Although nothing about the stateless can be found in the daily newspapers, except for lies, in this day and age, nothing can be kept hidden from social media. Stateless children, particularly boys, are forced to work from a young age. And because work is not available, they are forced to sell vegetables or watermelons in the streets. Kuwaiti locals drive their expensive German cars in the 100 degrees scorching heat and dust Kuwait is famous for, and see 8-year-old stateless boys selling watermelons in the streets. They drive their kids to school when they know that this 8-year-old boy will never get a chance to get an education. I participated in several of the peaceful stateless protests. I was there and saw how the Kuwaiti government oppressed these demonstrations by sending special forces in army tanks and spraying the protesters with tear gas and hot water. The special forces were violent, beating and injuring many of the protesters with batons, including myself. When I saw 3 cops beating a stateless man and I tried to intervene, I got hit in the stomach with a baton. When I tried to take pictures of the violence on my cell phone, the special forces confiscated my phone, destroyed it, and threatened to detain me. Although I could not keep the pictures I took of the protests, a photographer provided me with photos which I published in a book I will mention at the end of this essay. The stateless protesters, most of them young men, are arrested and imprisoned for 5 years or more. This is the reason why many stateless men are burning themselves in the streets as the only way for them to protest and escape imprisonment. Here are the names of the stateless men I know of who either hung themselves or burned themselves alive in Kuwait in the past year. Ali al-Shammiri, who was a 12-year-old boy. He took his own life by hanging in February 2021. Before Ali, there was Yaqub Mufrih, who was 26 years old. He took his own life by hanging. Before Yaqub, Badr al-Fadli lit himself on fire. Before Badr, Zayed al-Asmi also took his life by lighting himself on fire. And before Zayed, Talal al-Khalafi, who also took his life by lighting himself on fire in the streets. 2 new suicides also took place, one of them in June 8th, 2021, and another on August 6th, 2021. I could not find the names of these 2 last victims in my search on the internet and social media. Only the news that these men, one of them an elderly man, killed themselves by lighting themselves on fire. The Kuwaiti government, led by the Sheikh, forbids any local papers from printing anything negative about Kuwait. The stateless suicides are never mentioned in the papers. And the day after a peaceful protest by the stateless, all the local newspapers announced the same propaganda: that there was a riot by the stateless, that the Kuwaiti forces succeeded in bringing it under control, and that the stateless were violent towards the police, that they burned tires and damaged property. Kuwaiti papers publish other lies about how the Kuwaiti government is improving the lives of the stateless by lifting some of the restrictions, issuing them some kind of ID that allows them to drive legally, or accepting their children in free public schools. But these are all lies. If anything, the lives of the stateless in Kuwait are worsening every day. The Committee of the Illegal Residents, chaired by a corrupt man named Saleh al-Fadala, a puppet installed by the Sheikh, al-Fadala has been announcing since the committee's foundation in 2010 that the committee has proof that the stateless belong to other countries. However, such documents are never revealed, neither to the public or the stateless people concerned. In regards to the Kuwaiti Muslim people, and I want to emphasize the word Muslim here, they are well aware of the stateless tragedy in their country. They either believe the lies the Kuwaiti government feeds them, and therefore justify the inhumane treatment of the stateless. These lies include that the stateless are illegal residents who will not leave to their home countries where they belong. They are a nuisance. They are criminal offenders. They are unwanted immigrants who will weigh heavily on the country's economy if they were legalized. And the oldest trick in the book: the stateless will take away job opportunities and benefits from the natives. Please remember, we are talking about an oil-rich country with a population of 2.5 million people only. Some Kuwaiti people want a solution for the stateless tragedy, but fear of imprisonment or job loss keeps them quiet. How are the stateless in Kuwait coping with the pandemic? They are denied the COVID-19 vaccine by the Kuwaiti hospitals. Allow me to emphasize for the 3rd time here that Kuwait is a Muslim country. This is the humanity Muslims claim they practice. In 2012, while I was still a law professor living in Kuwait, I publicized that I wanted to hold a literary competition for the stateless. I asked them to send me poems, short stories, and other prose describing their daily lives, their hopes, and their fears. The competition had 2 categories. The first was for children under 18, and the second was for the 18-year-olds and older. 3 winners from each category got monetary prizes, and I collected all of the poems and prose into a booklet I named Judhur, the Arabic word for roots. I printed 1,000 copies, sold them, and gave the revenue to stateless children to cover school fees. It wasn't much, but it helped. This collection is in Arabic. A digital copy is available to access on my website. My website is in the description box. In the collection, I publish photos of the stateless protests and the brutality of the Kuwaiti forces against them. I hope to translate the collection into English someday. I have published an Arabic copy of this essay on my blog and an audio version on my YouTube channel, links available in the description box. I also found a short video on the tragedy of the stateless with English subtitles. Link available in the description box.